All right. Hey, friends.
Hey.
I'm Justin.
I'm Carrie.
And we're back for another After the Sermon. We are studying the Gospel according to John for the next several months in this series called Know the King. And today you might notice that we have two coffee mugs here, and I'm also drinking from another coffee mug. And you might think, why are you doing that? Well, there's nothing in these, and it's just here for looks, you know? And this is hot brown water, in the words of Ted Lasso. It's tea so that I don't cough through this entire video.
It is amazing that I have stayed as healthy as I have, being as close to you as we have.
I'm not sick. I had a cold 3 weeks ago and I'm still coughing. I don't know. I don't get it. It's frustrating. Hey, here's the thing. We studied John chapter 5, and I need to make a confession right off the top. And that is that I think I did a terrible job with this text. And sometimes you preach a sermon, I've been doing this for quite a long time now, and you go home and you're like, man, I don't know that I did a great job with that. Maybe you're watching this and you're like, man, give yourself some grace. Thank you, I appreciate that. But this is a very complicated text, and I think I could have preached for hours and still not uncovered everything, and I just want to make that confession. The other thing is we received some fantastic questions.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I am so grateful for those questions because I believe that questions are living in the flow of what Jesus says when he says, ask, seek, and knock. And so when we're asking these questions, it means that we're pursuing Jesus. And that's the whole point of this series, is that we would pursue Jesus and we would get to know Jesus. So we're going to tackle a couple of these questions. I'm supposed to ask you one about the mat. Is that right?
Ask me about the mat.
So this guy, he was a beggar. He was at the pool, 38 years. He had a mat that he would lay on. He would beg from. Jesus tells him to roll up the mat. Why did he take the mat with him? And I use this as an analogy in my sermon, saying it's a walking away from the old life, from his life of being a beggar. But he does take the mat with him. Why do you think he took the mat with him?
So when you're looking at questions like this, you kind of need to look at the world of the text, and then the world around the text, and then our world that we live in today. And we can't look at the world that Jesus lived in with the same eyes that we look at our world.
Yes.
So there's a couple different levels to this answer. Let's do the easy one, the practical answer. This was first century Jerusalem. The man was poor. He needed it. He still needed a place to sleep. He still needed a place to be, even though he was able to walk.
Yeah. So there may be two parts of this. One is the practicality of it, that he's still poor. He's probably still sees himself as a beggar. But Jesus can also be saying, walk away from this old way that you have identified yourself, of considering yourself to be an invalid or an impotent person.
Yeah.
Now I'm giving you a new identity, but you still need the mat because you're going to still need a place to
Absolutely
live and sleep.
And that kind of translates. We were talking about, I know, did you ever throw away your secular CDs?
Unfortunately I did.
I did too. So, back in the 90s.
Some of you might be thinking, what are you talking about? When you were a child of the 90s, there was some of this religiosity around music. And that music was evil, and the rock music, the beat of rock music was evil. And so what would you do as a good Christian kid? You would take those CDs and you might burn them, or you might throw them away so that you could be a better Christian.
Exactly. And this is even just calling to that. It's not about the thing.
No.
You can release the hold something has on you without burning it.
Burning the CDs.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. It's where we find our identity. And for this man, he did find his identity in that mat and in being a beggar and showing up at that pool every day. And probably even in some pagan worship of believing the angels are going to stir the water. And Jesus is inviting him to find his identity elsewhere. At least that's the way that we read the story.
Yeah, and actually, we didn't even talk about this before we started recording. It gives us a clue on that later. Because Jesus walks away after he heals this man, and the man doesn't even know that Jesus had healed him. And then we see in verse 14, later Jesus found him. Where is he?
At the temple.
At the temple.
So he's at a different place.
He's at a place to worship God.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
really cool. So he's no longer at the pool begging, a place that had become a place of disgrace.
Yeah.
But now he's at the temple to worship God.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
So,
All right, so the next question is, and this is a question that I think all of us have probably had at some point, and that is, why did Jesus only heal this one guy? Why did he not heal, or why is it not recorded that he didn't heal all 300 or 3,000? Because this is a holy festival, a holy day in John chapter 5. So how would you respond to that?
well, I respond to that with a question with the study tool I taught last week. We have to say, what do we know and what do we not know? And here are the things we do know. We know that the healing was not really the point. After this section, there is a whole discussion with the Pharisees about the Sabbath, because the thing they were mad about was not that Jesus healed the man. The thing they were mad about was that he did it on the Sabbath and the man carried his mat
On the Sabbath.
on the Sabbath. And this goes back to our conversation on John 3 with legalism and burdening yourself with things that aren't totally unnecessary.
They were mad because Jesus was poking and prodding their religious system.
Exactly.
And we're going to get to that here in just a second.
Even though he was trying to free them.
Yes.
Here's the other thing. Of all the people, this man did nothing to deserve it.
Yes.
He does not show faith. He does not show that he had any initiative to go to Jesus. And in fact, we find out he might not have even been that strong of a believer.
He might not even known who Jesus was.
He didn't know who
because
Jesus
later
was.
on he
Yeah.
says, the Pharisees come to him and say, who did this for you? And he's like, I don't know that dude, but where'd he go?
Yeah.
And so he didn't even know who Jesus was, but he did obey Jesus.
Yeah, when Jesus said, get up and walk, he said,
got up
okay.
and walked. Exactly.
Right. And then later Jesus finds him and Jesus has to make a comment to him, stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. Now, illness is not a result of sin.
No.
It is not. However, there is something about this man's life that Jesus needed to speak into that.
Yes.
There is nothing you can do to be good enough for Jesus to heal you.
Yeah. Or forgive you.
Or forgive you.
Or give you salvation. It may not even be physical healing. There's nothing we can do to earn the salvation, the mercy, the grace of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But when we receive that forgiveness and healing and grace, Jesus says, now go and sin no more.
Yes.
Like, stop living that old life and walk in a new
Mm-hmm.
life. And I'm sure that was a point of tension for this man.
Absolutely.
And he says that to him in the temple.
Yeah.
So now you are claiming to be a man of God, coming here to worship God.
Mm-hmm.
Live differently. Be different.
Exactly.
And that's a huge challenge. That's grace and truth. In John chapter 1, Jesus comes full in grace and truth.
Mm-hmm.
The grace is that he's received the grace of Jesus and healing. The truth is,
He can't go back to that.
can't go back to that old life.
And we see that there are good people that don't get healed.
Mm.
The Apostle Paul had something. We don't know what it was. That's what we don't know.
Yeah.
But what we do know is that there was an affliction that Paul had that he prayed and prayed and prayed that God would take it away. He called it his thorn, the thorn in his flesh. And the Bible tells us that he prayed 3 times that God would take it away. And this is what God said. He said, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. You see, God knows that we're broken bodies that get sick and have things wrong with us. That does not define your worth.
Yeah.
It doesn't define how much God loves you, and it does not define how God can use you.
That's right. And it doesn't mean that God is not there or working in your life.
Exactly.
Now, I would say there's a question under the question for this question. This is a good question.
It is.
Is there there's a multitude of people, why was only one healed? I think there's a question under that all of us are asking, and that is, why isn't God doing this work that I'm seeing over there in that person's life and my life? Mm-hmm. And man, that's a tough question. And we have to get to that thing under the thing under the thing under the thing and wrestle with that and lay it before Jesus and say, what do I need to do with this? What do you want to teach me in this about my heart and about my response to your work in my life? And honestly, for me, I'll just be completely transparent. Some of it comes from an envious heart. Mm-hmm. That sometimes I look at And I don't want to make light of some of you that may be praying for real healing in your life. But sometimes in my life, I look at what God is doing in somebody else's life. I might be looking at what God is doing in your life, Carrie. And I might be thinking, well, why isn't God doing that in my life? And God says, Justin, let me lay that envy before you.
Yeah.
Let me lay that jealousy before you. And that's difficult to wrestle with. But as he's laying that in front of me, he's sanctifying me. He's transforming me. He's healing me.
Yeah.
He's restoring my heart, because the restoration ultimately is not about these bodies. It's about my heart and my being loved by God and me loving God. And so there's a thing under the thing under the thing under the thing that is very, very difficult. All right, we have to move on. I know you want to say one more thing?
One more thing.
Okay.
One more thing. We get this at the end of John. Jesus is walking with Peter and talking to Peter about what's going to happen. And Peter sees John following, and Peter's like, well, what about him? What about him? And Jesus says, it does not matter.
Yes.
I have a plan for him, and I have a plan for you.
Yes.
Your job is to live out the plan I have for you.
Take responsibility for your story.
Exactly.
And your journey and what God is doing in your life. Celebrate that. Say yes to it. Live in obedience.
Yep.
And and Paul says it leads to great joy.
Absolutely.
His thorn is never taken away. He suffers that thorn. But he says it leads to perseverance, endurance. It leads to hope. It leads to joy. And so taking ownership of my own story and my own journey, saying yes to that, and believing that God is doing something good in it.
Absolutely.
All right, we got to talk about one more thing.
All right.
We're getting long-winded. All right,
This
last
is great.
one.
All right. Here's a great question.
Okay.
We've talked in the past of the importance of the Sabbath.
Okay.
To rest in God's presence and fill ourselves up. So how do we practically balance the Old Testament and the New Testament perspective of Sabbath?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm only partially kidding. So I say this all the time. I want to be the comma in a conversation. I don't ever want to be a period. So what I'm about to share with you, I just want it to be a comma. I want it to continue the conversation, the exploring that you might be on as we walk through the Gospel of John. But I will say this. What we know is that Jesus came not to put an end to the law, but to fulfill it. So what that means is what we see in the life of Jesus is what the law was always meant to be, and how it was meant to be lived out, and how it was meant to be fleshed out. Which also says this to me, that it's possible the way that the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, myself, the church, have interpreted the Old Testament without the lenses of Jesus have actually not been correct.
Yes.
And so when we talk about the Sabbath, which is a part of the law, the Old Testament law, and we talk about it as being like a day of no work.
Right.
You know, here are the 22 things that I cannot do on my Sabbath. And then we see Jesus do good work on the Sabbath. Jesus is fulfilling the law.
Yeah.
He's showing us this is what Sabbath is supposed to look like. This is what it looks like to live in the flow and the rhythm of God. Right? And so it's possible what's happening is Jesus is inviting us to see the law in a new way.
Right.
So here is a verse 17 of chapter 5. I wish I would have gotten to this on Sunday. Jesus says, my Father is always working, and so am I. Always. What's that word mean?
Always.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
Does that mean the Sabbath?
Absolutely.
Is the Sabbath included in the word always?
Absolutely.
Okay. So does God not do work on the Sabbath? He's always working, Jesus says. If it means healing, if it brings life to dead places, that's what God does on the Sabbath. So God is not going to take a break from bringing life and goodness to the world on the Sabbath. I was thinking about this morning as we were preparing for this teaching. What does it mean for us, the Sabbath? I think if we go back to Israel being enslaved to Egypt, and that is when Sabbath is introduced to them, is when they are brought out of Egypt, right? I think what the Sabbath was meant to do was to remind them that they are not defined by producing bricks for the empire.
Yeah.
Because 7 days a week, their job was to wake up every day and produce bricks for the empire. God brings them out and says, you are my people, my holy, treasured people. you are no longer defined by making bricks for the empire of this world. So Sabbath, once a week, I would say on a daily basis, we need some sort of Sabbathing to be reminded we are not defined by making bricks for the empire.
Exactly. And it's not about a list of things you cannot do.
No.
It's about what brings you rest on that day.
Yes.
What brings you peace and joy in the things of God.
Yeah.
And
But if my friend calls me and says, can we chat for 15 minutes on my Sabbath? I'm not going to say no.
No.
Because that conversation is bringing life to the world. Like that conversation could be bringing life to my friend's world. It could be bringing healing to my friend's world. But there are things where I'm making bricks for the empire and I'm tempted to find my worth and my value in those things. On my Sabbath, I need to say no to those. My identity is not found in these bricks, in this production. I'm going to set that aside and I'm going to celebrate life. I'm going to enjoy life. I'm going to bring life to the world. That's the example that Jesus sets for us. I don't think Jesus is doing anything different from the Old Testament.
No, not at all. And that's because that's not what the law was originally done.
That's right.
The Pharisees were so concerned because people were breaking the law all over the place before they came along. It was crazy. And so they were like, we need to make sure we're actually following the 10 Commandments. Good thing. But what they did was it was called fencing the law. And they would put rules around each one of those. So if you can't get close, well, then you're not going to break it.
Goes back to our CDs.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so what Jesus is saying is like,
Yes.
we don't need to be doing that.
Yes. Yeah, and they missed it.
They missed it because they thought it was about following the letter of the law.
Because of their fencing, they missed life.
Yeah.
And more life.
They missed Jesus doing a miracle in front of them.
They missed it. Don't miss it.
No.
Don't build so many religious fences that you miss the work and the life of Jesus.
Absolutely.
Right?
Right.
All right. That's enough for today. I hope this continues some conversations for you. Keep sending your questions. It is so good. I hope that you're enjoying these conversations. I know I am.
Oh, yeah, me too.
All right. Until next time, see you later.
Bye-bye.